So hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2022 Southeast Collaborative Online Conference. My name is Lauren Classy. I'm the Continuing Education Consultant for the State Library of North Carolina, and I will be your host for this session that's entitled Let's Get Information Lit, Archival Sources as Information Literacy. This event is supported through funding from the Library Services and Technology Act through the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat or interact with other attendees and with the speakers within the Whova app for this recorded presentation. And now I would like to introduce our speakers for this session, Garrison Libby and Aaron Alsop. Thank you for being with us, and I'll pass it over to you.
All right, well, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Aaron and I will both be in the chat, so as you watch this presentation, if you do have questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and we will be, of course, happy to speak with you. But again, my name is Garrison Libby with Aaron Alsop, and we are going to do a presentation about connecting the archives with information literacy instruction. So just a few takeaways from today's session. Hopefully by the end of this next 45 minutes or so, you will learn how archival sources can be used to promote understanding of information literacy. You will learn a bit more about how archives can be used to highlight underrepresented voices that are not always reflected in the scholarly journal record. You will learn some specific activities you can incorporate in some courses that you do that will integrate archival sources into library instruction sessions. And we'll also share a few specific public archive repositories that you can incorporate in those instruction sessions, or that you can share with students in your library instruction.
So just some introductions. Oh, sorry, Garrison.
No, go ahead, please.
So just jumping in, I know my camera is off for this presentation, but my photo is here. For those who don't know me, my name is Aaron Alsop, and I am the archivist for Central Piedmont Community College. A lot of what I do, I preserve and provide access to our institutional heritage materials through a variety of ways, involving processing, metadata creation, web development, database management, you name it, I probably do it. But a lot of what we're trying to do at Central Piedmont is get students aware of not just what archives are, but the value that archive institutions, archival repositories can have in the research process. And through my collaboration with Garrison and his team, it's been a really wonderful opportunity to introduce students to the world of archives, but also getting faculty to think about how information can be accessed and thought of in different ways, aside from just the standard scholarly journal article, which we'll talk about later in this presentation.
And I am Garrison Libby. I am the Assistant Director for Instructional and Research Services at Central Piedmont Community College. So my role is primarily to kind of coordinate the library's instruction program. I work in collaboration with our instruction librarians across our 6 different campuses here at Central Piedmont to build a really good library instruction experience, so that our students leave by the time they finish at Central Piedmont, they will have gotten good information literacy and research skills. So I work with the librarians to really coordinate that and kind of make sure we're all on the same page.
So just some information, just some quick facts about Central Piedmont. We're an associate degree granting institution, which was founded in Charlotte, North Carolina in 1963 as a result of the Community College Act, which was passed on July 1st of 63. Just some background, at least in terms of our history. We were born really out of the merger of 2 institutions, the predominantly African-American Mecklenburg College and the predominantly white Central Industrial Education Center. And while you had diverse student populations merging campuses and using one facility for educational purposes, it also was the merging of different types of courses. So you had your gen ed, more liberal arts classes, but then you also had your trade skills and hands-on, hands-on learning that you can really go to any community college today and get that experience. We have a diverse population in terms of age groups and backgrounds and all sorts of other things. And there's and really the library serves a lot of the needs of these students who are there to seek specific degrees for their career, transfer credits to go to another institution, or just looking to get back into school and brush the dust off a little bit in their educational journey. Garrison, I didn't know if there's anything else from the library that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on the main point there. But again, I think one of the biggest things about us is that as a community college, we really do have a very diverse student population. We get folks who are fresh out of high school. We have folks who are coming back to school for the first time after 20 years in the workforce. And really, we serve all of them. And really, it's our mission to help them succeed no matter what. So what I want to focus on for the next little bit is talking a little bit about our current instruction practices, what we do, and how that led us to our collaboration with the archives to kind of rethink how we can introduce and talk about information literacy. So for us at Central Piedmont, as I'm sure it is for many of you if you're at an academic library, there is a little bit of a central tension in how we approach instruction. Most of our instruction has traditionally occurred within the context of a 50-minute one-shot library session. 50 minutes, we get a class, maybe it's an English 111 class, a history class, whatever it is, we get our 50 minutes to teach them everything they could possibly need to know about the library within that 50-minute time span. We do also have a pretty robust embedded librarian program. So we do also have many classes in which we also do get some additional touch points by being embedded in their online course. But oftentimes our instruction time, our point of contact with students in the classroom is a little bit limited. And for us as librarians, we have two major goals we are trying to achieve. Oftentimes when an instructor brings us into a class, it's because they have a typical research assignment, write an essay, cite at least 5 sources, and they really want their students learning how to navigate library resources, how to search a database, how to use a database, which is a very important, valuable skill. But for us as librarians, we also want to make sure that we are building good, we are building good information literacy habits in our students. Because as a community college, many of our students are going to transfer on to a 4-year college where they might have more advanced research assignments, but many of our students are taking a few classes and then they're going to enter the workforce. And we want students to not just know how to navigate a database, but also be able to engage critically with the world of information. We want them thinking about the different forms, formats, functions, shapes, the different ways they might encounter information, and how to engage with it and how to evaluate information in order to be, good stewards of information, in order to have good information habits. And that can be tough to do sometimes when, an instructor has a very clear idea of students can only use peer-reviewed journal sources, and then also just having that limited time in which to work with students. Again, we just teach within the scope of a 50-minute one-shot class. So it can be a tricky balancing act, figuring out how can we help students build these skills, these kind of information literacy skills, while also helping them with the nuts and bolts of database navigation. They're very closely connected concepts, of course, but sometimes the database piece kind of takes the focus, and we don't have as much time to talk about the information literacy piece. The other part of what we do try to do when we talk about information literacy is we really try to incorporate the ACRL framework for information literacy. So in thinking about how these intersect with the missions and goals of archives, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about a few of the frames of the ACRL framework. So one of the dimensions of information literacy that the ACRL framework asks students to think about is authority is constructed and contextual. Again, many of our students are doing academic research assignments where the instructor expects them to use an academic, scholarly, peer-reviewed journal article and not much else. And so we want students to understand, what does authority mean? How do you know when you can trust the author of a particular source? And yes, the peer-reviewed article is oftentimes the gold standard when it comes to authority, because there is a process built in terms of vetting and making sure that those are useful, it's good information. But I think sometimes the focus that instructors have on peer-reviewed journals often misses the other ways students might encounter and engage with authority. Again, many of our students are not going on into higher-level academic research, so the authority that they encounter might appear in different places. It might appear in trade journals. It might appear in, technical manuals. And so part of what we really want to do is get students thinking beyond the peer-reviewed journal article and thinking more about what makes an authority and how can we determine the authority behind a certain source, or at what times is a certain source authoritative, and what other times might that very same source not be a good authority. So the ways in which we kind of try to engage what authority means in terms of, thoughtfully engaging with information. That ties into another dimension of the framework, which states research as inquiry, and basically posits that research is not a one and done process. Oftentimes when you're researching, you are, you're asking a question, but in the process of answering that question, you are discovering other related and connected questions. And so again, it's not enough to just take the first authoritative source you find, but also think more deeply about what voices am I seeing and where are these voices? The scholarly journal article, again, is a great source, but it's not always reflective of all the voices that might be participating in a particular conversation. Scholarly articles, academia is primarily white and male. That is changing, but when you focus on the peer-reviewed journal article, that does often mean that voices might be left out. And so we also want students to understand that when they're doing an assignment for a class that involves research, they are entering the conversation of scholarship. They are doing research not just to learn more, but also to enter dialogue with the other voices that are involved in that conversation, doing dialogue with the sources that they find, which again requires thinking deeply about where are those conversations happening? And again, what places beyond the journal article might there be important pieces of that conversation? And this is where it can, sometimes run into a bit of tension with the instructor, who often does require that peer-reviewed journal article, which is important. But I think we do sometimes do a disservice to our students by not engaging with them about other types of sources and helping them learn when and how those might be appropriate to incorporate into an academic assignment. And so in thinking about these things, the archives became a very good partner to help bridge that gap between the quote unquote scholarly source and the quote unquote public source. Because ultimately, we do want students to understand how to engage with sources, even when they're not behind that wall of peer review, to help students understand that oftentimes when you have a question, the answer, pieces of the answer might be found in many different places, and the archives are a very good fit to help bring that conversation into a better light. So I'm going to turn over to Erin, who will talk a little bit more about the archives and kind of how what she's trying to do with the archives ties into our role in instruction.
Yes, thank you. So here's just a slide about just an inclusion of archives, why it's needed and how we do it. So really about, why include archives in this process at all? Well, for sake of time, these were like really the 6 points that we thought were the most important to share. There's probably others that we could have included, but I think the biggest point though is that it raises awareness. So by incorporating archives into the instruction process, we're exposing students to a broader variety of sources and voices. So going back to Garrison's mention of, say, like the peer-reviewed journal article, say I'm a historian who has or say I'm conducting research and find a peer-reviewed journal article on the Battle of Bunker Hill, right? But then say maybe throughout the research, I noticed that the author of that article I found, cites an actual journal that someone who was in the battle was writing about. I mean, getting students to think about like the firsthand account, the firsthand perspective, which is mainly, what we tell students primary sources are. But, again, giving the students the opportunity to actually engage and access those primary sources and teaching them how to do it, right? Because that journal article may include different perspectives, different people, aside from soldiers who are maybe on the battlefield, right? It could be, indigenous peoples who were helping the cause of the war or just trying to help themselves in many ways. And all of that, I guess, it could relate to a ton of different other historical events and situations. But, again, just getting students to understand that, especially when it comes to world events, local events, there's always going to be so many different perspectives, right? And getting students to critically think about whose perspective or whose group of perspectives are included in the scholarly record for years to come and whose aren't. But also, this also helps not just raise awareness about the variety of sources and voices, but it helps to raise awareness about archives in general, right? Archives, I think over the past, say, few decades have had this, this unapproachable vibe to it where, you have to have 3, letters of recommendation, and knowledge and experience with conducting research in an archive in order to even just access the records either in person or online. And I mean, all of that to me was always a challenge to overcome. Even as I started out as, working in archives, over 10 years ago now, and just seeing, who patrons an archive and who doesn't patron an archive, like that to me was always very noticeable in that sense. So by providing our students with this experience, this opportunity to learn about the world of archives, it helps break down those barriers and it makes them more, or at least the end goal is so that if they do go on to a 4-year university or go into the workforce and they approach or come across an archive at some point in their lives, they would have that experience and that sorry, I'm like blanking on the word, but they would be more comfortable with approaching an archive because they would have been exposed to it early on, right? But also this provides greater research opportunities for our students as well. So when they do enter the workforce or, transfer to a university level, they will have already been accustomed and introduced to this research process. So they would feel more comfortable in that regard. But also this helps to create more diverse research communities, because I know, at least for Central Piedmont Archives, while we do have a rich history relating to not just our institution, but our predecessors at Mecklenburg College, Carver College, and the CIEC, there are a lot of groups and voices that were not included in our record, like, for example, LGBTQ students and faculty and staff. And I know a lot of the time some people want to be added to the record, some people just do not want to at all, right? But having no record, no reflection of a certain community that was obvious and something that I felt should be included. So by finding representation and finding your own self-identity, right, in these collections, in the records that we are telling our students to engage with and teaching them to engage with, that hopefully will go on to inspire more diverse research communities down the line. But lastly, it also helps to engage critical thinking activities. So if you can think of yourself, put yourself in the perspective of, or in the shoes of someone else who is not like me, right? Or who lived in a different time than I did. I, as a student, as a researcher, I could probably have a better understanding of why certain things happened the way they did, and have, a resolution to ensure that what happened in the past won't happen again in the future. So just some ways of how we incorporate these sources. Really, we looked at 2 classes, mainly with history faculty at this point, because we just needed the support from faculty, and history was the easiest one to get the support from, right? So at least in terms of the research requirements for assignments, we decided to have archival sources added as part of the primary source requirement. So again, going back to that Journal of Bunker Hill versus the peer-reviewed journal article about the battle itself, so getting students and teaching them how to find these archive sources, but also introducing them to how archival collections are organized and accessed. So for those unfamiliar with archival organizational practices, we don't follow Library of Congress call numbers for our books. We try and process collections in the ways in which they were donated to us or given to us, and respecting that original order, right? But also the creation of finding aids and certain data that we use, and certain data templates, right? Like Dublin Core, things of that nature. And granted, there is an overlap with library sciences, but getting students to be familiar with the similarities and the differences and how archival sources are organized was a big component of it, because if you don't understand what it is that you're looking at, aside from just the source itself, but then using that, the data supporting that source and understanding how to put that in a citation, right? I mean, all of these things are a very important part of that research process. So giving students that opportunity and the skills to know how to do it, and the confidence as well. And as I had mentioned earlier, it was through this collaboration with history faculty to create special assignments. So aside from just the standard assignment that they have each semester, we worked with 2 history faculty instructors to create specific assignments and find where archival sources could fit. So we partnered with them on, Garrison had mentioned, how to navigate databases. And that within that 15-minute session, obviously that navigational piece does take up a lot of that time, because we're also adding in how to find archival collections online, right? But then giving students the opportunity to then take what they've learned and explore on their own, in a guided, practical way. And then just giving them, say, with the introductory assignment, find one archival source, find one secondary source from the library database. And it's been a really great collaboration so far. And we hope to expand this to, other programs outside of history. It's just in order for people to know and understand what it is that we're doing, this was the natural fit. So then lastly, just thinking about searching as strategic exploration, this ties into the ACRL framework again, and then getting students to think about where they would go to connect a research topic with primary sources. So is it always going to be a library database? Is it always going to be the National Archives? Not necessarily, right? But would it be perhaps, say, a museum? I guess, especially if you're exploring archival collections of ancient civilizations like pottery and clay tablets, cuneiform writing, right? It's very, very difficult to access these things and see these things in person, but thankfully for the internet and with supporters worldwide to get these sources out for the public to be able to access, right? It gets students to think about the different conversations that take place surrounding historical events, but also surrounding what decides to get preserved, what voices get preserved, but then also thinking whose voices are left out, what perspectives are disregarded or not included for whatever reason, right? And then also thinking about the different forms and formats information can take. So I know I had mentioned, ancient pottery and things that we can, as historians, we could get a good sense of information about what life and culture was like. But thinking about modern times, like, is there value in a tweet? Is there value in social media? Is there value in the internet? I mean, I would definitely say yes. And a lot of us are probably thinking yes, right? But is that a credible source? That's where this whole thing comes together to have students understand that if they see something online, they need to understand that it's either can be credible or not credible, and they need to understand the vetting process. Who is posting that? What is the perspective? What is, what are they capturing, and what are they sharing, and what are they not sharing, right? But then lastly, thinking about these different types of sources that instructors get and understand. Garrison, I don't know if you had anything else to add on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you summed it up pretty well, but excuse me. I think that last point is it's part of why archives make a very good bridge. And again, if you're an academic librarian, your instructors might be different, but many of our instructors are a little bit reluctant to move beyond kind of traditional academic sources. But when you approach the idea of archives and primary sources in that way, that's something that they really do grasp. Be like, oh yeah, like archival sources, like there's some credibility there, there's some like authority there. And so it does help make that bridge to more quote unquote public sources. And again, like archives also have work to do in terms of capturing a more diverse and reflective record. But I do think you do see a lot more diversity in some of the voices and some of the collections and archives than sometimes you do see in the traditional scholarly record. So the archives make a very good bridge toward helping instructors kind of understand the relevance of what we're trying to get at in terms of information literacy.
Exactly. And then just thinking out loud, the thought just popped into my head too. A lot of what is accessible in archives really comes from support and funding, right? So if your institution has the funds and the support to process these collections and get these voices and perspectives out into the ether to be accessed and analyzed and researched, that's wonderful. But there are so many other institutions out there that do not have the funding, that do not have the personnel support to get these sources out and processed and accessible in a way and described in a way, because all of that takes time, a great deal of effort, and I think in years to come, maybe things will turn around, but I think that's also a big reason why archives tend to be an untapped resource. It's mainly due to funding.
And so for the next section here, I'm going to talk about a few kind of more concrete examples of lessons that can be incorporated into library instruction that make this connection between archival sources and information literacy that hopefully you could integrate into your classrooms. So first up, we have a pretty kind of basic activity. This can be one that doesn't have to require a lot of time. It's one we are hoping to use more in some of our first year seminar classes, and just a very basic kind of timeline activity. And so to do this, all you gotta do is just pick an event or a topic. Let's use the COVID pandemic for an example, because I'm sure no one's tired of COVID at this point. And so the idea behind this activity is just to collect a variety of sources about a particular topic. So if we're talking about COVID, for example, it might be that, one article might be the first news article you can find mentioning COVID way back in, I believe it was December of 2019 when it was first kind of started to be reported and identified. You might include tweets about COVID as lockdown started. You might include peer-reviewed journal articles that have been published about COVID, and then possibly like books about COVID. Collect a variety of sources about a particular topic and have students arrange them in a timeline in terms of when was this published. And that also provides a very good springboard to talking about some of these different information literacy ideas, like in terms of like, what does the process, how does the process in which they were created and published, how does that inform these sources? Is there any barrier to posting a tweet? What kinds of barriers are there to publish a news article? Or why is a news article published so much more quickly than an academic journal article or a book? You can start having those conversations. And again, to bring it back to the ACRL framework, talk about information creation as a process. You can have these conversations about how is information produced, what kinds of systems are in place to vet that information before it goes out. And then that also provides another springboard in talking about, for an academic, for a college level class, how do we engage with these different types of sources, and when and how are they appropriate to use? This is a really great activity for a first year seminar because those students are starting to learn what are these different types of sources and what types of sources do they want to use for college level research. So I think it's a great activity. Again, just collecting a few, a sort of articles about an event. With COVID, there's a fantastic resource called the COVID-19 Archive that collects different stories, experiences, and stuff about COVID and makes it publicly available online. And hopefully I'll remember to pop the link into the chat when I'm talking about this when you're watching it. Another activity that we have done, and this is a more involved activity and really requires the instructor buy-in, but Erin talked earlier about our collaboration with history faculty. So with one of our history classes, History 131, which is US history up through the Civil War, we took that time activity and we expanded it into a more robust assignment. The instructor assigned as a kind of a major assignment for that course. So the students had to pick an event or a topic within US history from that, until the Civil War time span, and just try to find 5 different sources on that topic, a mixture of primary and secondary sources, ideally kind of across time. So they were supposed to find 5 sources and do a very basic annotated bibliography, talking about what are those sources, who wrote them, when were they published, and just to think a little bit about them. And then there was a reflection piece where they had to write just kind of a 2-page response really think about, how does the way this topic is talked about change over time? And also thinking about when I did my research, whose voices did I find reflected in the record? And are there any voices that I didn't see that maybe were valuable? So for example, if the student picked Jamestown Colony, it might be that they saw some really great voices from, settlers, but there's not nearly as many, if any at all, voices that have been captured from the Native American experience. So thinking about whose voices are left out and how does that impact the way that this topic is understood. So it gets not only to the ACRL framework, talking about the competition of scholarship, but also for the history class, the instructor was very excited because it also got that historiography piece and thinking about who, how do we write about history and how do we understand history?
So lastly, and DocsTeach is a really wonderful tool provided by the National Archives. And what's cool about the tool is that it gives you an opportunity to explore, pre-created activities based on certain topics relating to American history, or you as an instructor can create your own. And what I guess is too nice about DocsTeach is that it's activities for a variety of educational levels. So anything really from K through 12, and also, in early college years as well. And what this does is, from the National Archives, it's an online tool for teaching with documents. And what this does is give students an opportunity to say access, say a letter, for example, and it gives a list of prompted questions, asking about who wrote it, who wrote this letter, who is the letter to, who is it from, all the basic things that, as instructors, we would ask the students to kind of write and reflect upon. But then there also are components where there are these reflective pieces. So similar to what Garrison was saying about that annotated bibliography and reflection assignment, DocsTeach really does give that opportunity for that type of activity in I guess, a more approachable online format, right? But what also is really cool with DocsTeach is, while you do have to create a free account, students can add their answers, on the website itself, and then they submit it, and those answers are submitted and sent to your email address so that you could read, the student answers, create other activities, maybe combining certain answers, things of that nature. Again, this is not a tool that we've implemented heavily in our instruction sessions at this point yet, but it is something that we hope to continue, because I honestly didn't discover it until like the middle of last semester. So unfortunately, we didn't use it for last semester, but we're hoping to include it here. And again, just some other resources that we use within Central Piedmont, North Carolina. We are very fortunate to have an organization called the North Carolina Digital Heritage Center, not just for providing and preserving access to North Carolina history, but the NC Digital Heritage Center is also a great resource for us in terms of getting our sources scanned, and they really help us do a lot of that legwork with metadata creation, migration from, say, certain audio formats, right? I'm not sure of the specific capabilities with audio, but I know it's something that they're exploring now. But really, and it's a free service for institutions in North Carolina. So for us, that is a saving grace because they help us out with getting these sources after they're processed anyway and organized into a collection format. They really do a great service for us with getting our things online, accessible, and readable, really. Obviously, the National Archives, it's something that we talked about a few times already, but it goes without saying. And also the Internet Archive. I know we were talking earlier about different types of sources, the different formats of resources, right? And really the Internet Archive is literally that, the archive of the internet. And, there's a whole, whole series of human historical events from the early days of the internet, right? I think they started documenting the internet from like the mid 90s up through today. So if you want to peel back the layers of our humanities digital history, our history on the internet, it is a really wonderful source and a tool that really has come to really come to serve as a powerful resource, especially in the digital world where things can, quote unquote, easily be deleted. Because as we all know, once it's, if it's deleted, it's not really deleted, right? But the Internet Archive really does a service for, for researchers, for scholars, and being able to see what actually was posted online and what was edited online, right? But, lastly, for those on this, listening to our presentation that maybe don't have an archive or are looking for other ways to tap into their local libraries and historical societies, they're wonderful institutions, and even your community colleges as well. You may have a whole wealth of history there and not even realize it, right? But especially with local libraries, historical societies, and your universities and community colleges, it sometimes is an untapped resource, right? But also, I think by raising awareness of the sources that and services that these institutions could provide, it will help raise awareness and really advocate for the need to support these types of institutions as well. So here are some outcomes so far that we've just documented about our collaborations with History 131 and History 111. With History 131, the students did respond well to the timeline activity, but in hindsight, we should have organized the class as a more staggered approach to the assignment, as opposed to just introducing the assignment in the beginning of the semester and then checking in at the end of the semester. Like I said, the students did reach out if they had questions, and we were embedded into the Brightspace shells as well, so that we could, post updates and pose or share other sources, things like that we had come across. Like DocsTeach was one of them, actually. But our students, they if they're not a student full-time, odds are they are working full-time and also going to school. So sometimes students would respond back. Oftentimes they would not, but at least if they did reach out, we knew that, we would always respond back and get them what they needed. And then because with that particular instructor, he isn't teaching History 131 this semester, but he will be teaching it next year as well. So yeah, we look forward to seeing how that evolves over time. But then with History 111, we thought, well, World Civilization, Central Piedmont Archives does not have anything related to, ancient civilizations and ancient world history. But if we could succeed by, taking the approach of teaching about archives in general. So as mentioned earlier, how to access collections, how to read finding aids, how to understand archival metadata, versus what we have in our collections, because that was always the biggest thing when approaching faculty about this. They would say, well, CP Archives doesn't have anything about Russian history, about early American history, so how is that going to work for us? And that instructor, who gave us that idea about that approach, it really worked to our benefit, because while finding archival sources on ancient civilizations is definitely challenging, because you can definitely find more peer-reviewed journal articles about ancient Mesopotamia than you can on, finding some tablet or something, or, a piece of clothing or some artifact from that time period. It was challenging, but really rewarding. And I know that the students did write back to us to say that they really enjoyed the experience and getting an opportunity to have a different perspective on the research process. And again, going back to how with 131, how we should have staggered the assignment, we are staggering the assignment this semester for History 111. So we will check in at 3 times throughout the semester, introducing students to the research process of how to navigate databases using different chunks of time periods. So time will tell, maybe by the time we're all listening in. And with the Q&A section, we'll have, more to share on that. But again, these have been the outcomes so far.
And then just to bring it all home, we'll conclude by talking about just some of the reality we faced. So Aaron and I have been very excited about this collaboration, but of course there have been a lot of transitions amidst COVID. Whereas previously most of the classes at Central Piedmont were in person, increasingly now, of course, things are online or hybrid. So our instruction is evolving just to match the changing reality of instruction of classes at Central Piedmont. So we're adjusting and still trying to find ways to make sure we still get those touch points with students. Ultimately, we want to be working very closely with faculty. We want them to be engaged and to support what we're doing as we're supporting their own goals. So it does require talking with them about the information literacy goals that we do have when we teach, and hoping that they will help, understand our need to talk not just about database navigation, but also information literacy and engaging with information. We are very fortunate here at Central Piedmont in that we do have a brand new library that's opening up, hopefully in the next few months, which will have a new classroom space and much more visible collections and archives. And so more opportunity for students to engage with their own collections, but also a better classroom for students to engage collaboratively with each other and with library staff. And ultimately, we're hoping just to kind of build conversations. Here in Charlotte, we have so many great institutions that capture so much history of Charlotte, of North Carolina, of specialized topics. And there are hopefully going to be great opportunities to, bring those in, especially for our history classes as well, to help students get more exposure to the world of information that's out there here in Charlotte itself. And so really that's kind of it, but thank you all so much. If you do have questions, please share them in the chat. Aaron and I are here answering questions. We'll be monitoring the chat kind of throughout the course of the conference. So if you come in later, please chat with us. I believe our email addresses were linked earlier on, but we'll also post them in the chat. And thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. And we look forward to any questions that you may have, but also if there are resources and other projects similar to ours that we can learn about and learn from, please, please, please let us know. And we would love to talk more. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Garrison and Aaron, for sharing with us today. This was great. And thank you to everyone who's watching right now. If you have any other questions, again, we encourage you to reach out to the speakers or to us as conference hosts using the Whova app to continue conversations. An evaluation is provided for you with this conference session's resources, and we welcome your feedback about the session and the conference. Thanks to everyone for making the 2022 Southeast Collaborative Conference successful, and we'll see you all next year.